Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined once again by Laura Bradburn. Laura flying the flag for ACSOM yesterday and today, 2 bulletins yesterday and the matchday coverage today. Normally it would just be your usual, let's have a look at the team, let's have a look at some of the changes, but there's been loads of other conversations and discussions since we last spoke yesterday. Laura, you were thrown in instantly, as soon as that news broke. We've gone live at 5 o'clock. But to be fair, I think looking back on the discussion yesterday, I'm going to stand by everything that we said yesterday. I think that the statement was very much in keeping with a normal, generic corporate style statement. And I now have major concerns about what's happening behind the scenes at Celtic. So we'll have a wee chat about that. We'll have a wee chat about the lineup, some of the dilemmas we spoke about during the week and what Ange has decided to do. And also, when we're looking up front, we might also have a wee look at how Odsonne Edouard is doing south. Rangers have just beaten St Johnstone 2-1, so we know where we are in relation to the gap and the gap that we need to close. But let's have a wee chat about Celtic's lineup for Ross County. And apologies to anyone who tuned in and thought I was a wee bit quieter or more echoey. That's because my mic was switched off. So whatever you were hearing was getting picked up from the various mics in the room. But I blame the board for that, because obviously they took us unaware. Laura, we should have got more warning than that. Let's have a wee chat about the defence. Quite a few wee changes at the back. We weren't sure if Taylor was fit. He's made it. But the decision to play Juranovic at right back seems to have been prompted by this medical condition that kept Tony Ralston away from his first Scotland call-up. What's your thoughts about the back line there, Laura?
I think looking at the Taylor and Juranovic thing, obviously you hope and you would suspect that Taylor is back to full fitness after the shoulder injury that he had, so I've no concerns there. I think Tony Ralston will be cursing his luck as far as things are concerned, because I think without whatever this mystery illness is, he would have, as Jim alluded to yesterday, would have been in a good position to keep a hold of his jersey. Unfortunately for him, this illness has come along at a time where it's allowed Juranovic to capitalise on the fact that he played as well as he did against Rangers and just make the move back into his preferred position. And you know, you wonder then how Ralston's going to get himself back into the team, because based on the very little that I've seen of Juranovic so far, he's not going to be easy to get out of that position either. Looking at the centre-backs, obviously excited to see Carter Vickers and see what he can bring to the team, but I think Stephen Welsh will feel a little bit hard done by. I think he's done nothing wrong, and assuming again that there's no injury problem that we're not aware of, I think him not being in the team, he'll be rightly sort of feeling a bit hard done by, but that's the nature of being at Celtic. You know, you have to hopefully, if the squad's in a good enough position, you have to fight to keep your place, and there will always be competition for places. Plus, you know, as shaky a start as Starfelt had, he seems to have started to find his feet in the last few appearances, so perhaps, and just thinking, you know, we don't want to shoot down his confidence by putting him out of the team just as he seems to be getting settled. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, I mean, on paper, you know, if we can get that back line up and running and get them playing well, then it's a strong enough looking forward, and Hart in goal as always is as reliable as he always has been, I think.
That's been a point of discussion for about the last 12 months when we've been doing the pre-matches, Laura, the goalkeeper, you know, who was the number one. We were never quite sure. I'm not even positive that the manager was quite sure last season. No. It was chopping and changing. It really is great to be able to look at that team line and just take for granted that number one is going to be Joe Hart. Right back, I will be interested to see Juranovic in his natural position. I thought he was, in terms of a debut, he was very impressive, even though he was out of position. It was in the cauldron of Ibrox with no Celtic fans in the stadium, and I think, you know, he took it in his stride. I would love to see him today in his natural position. Left back, Taylor, there was a bit of chat during the week about Liam Scales coming into the first team, and we know that he can play left wing back, left centre half, so he's an adaptable player. But Taylor keeps the jersey. I've got no concerns about Taylor in a game like this. No disrespect to Ross County. We know what happened when they came to Celtic Park It was in October, wasn't it, last season? And, ended our incredible domestic cup run. But I think that he's comfortable in a game like this. The big surprise for many will be the omission of Stephen Welsh. But again, we did speak about it, Laura, because looking at Stephen Welsh's, his career at Celtic, I feel a bit sorry for him, to be fair. I think that, he was thrown in last season at the worst possible time. It's not as though he was, properly bedded into the side, given game time whenever possible. But, potentially in games like the last couple of home games that we've seen, that's when you want to bleed in a youngster, bring them on for 20 minutes, half an hour when the game's done and dusted, and get them used to the different standards, because it's a massive step up from the youth, as Stephen Welsh would have been part of, to the first team. We've been talking about that bridge and trying to bridge that gap for a long time. The coach team is part of that process. But I felt sorry for him because he was thrown in having only had one game against Hamilton. And the game he was thrown into just happened to be the first Glasgow derby of last season, which was a dreadful performance. No shots on target. And, I did worry back then if he was going to be a scapegoat. I think throughout the season, though, he came through really, really well. And he established himself as part of the first team squad. I said during the week, however, Laura, that I had a feeling this might happen today. Now, it's going to be difficult for Welsh to feel that he's not been dropped. It always would be. But he's been dropped already this season, hasn't he, at Tynecastle? And that didn't quite work out, throwing in a central defender for his first game at Tynecastle. I get what you're saying with Starfelt. I think it would also, that would interrupt his momentum. If he's going to try, if we're going to try and get the best out of him, we need him to get games. But we also need him to have a kind of partnership. And he's not really had that yet. His first game, he lined up alongside Beaton. He's played a few games with Stephen Welsh. Now he's playing with Carter Vickers. So two of the big issues last season, the goalkeeper, we never knew who it was going to be, and the two central defenders chopped and changed all year. We're still at that stage where we're still chopping and changing a fair bit. Who do you think will be the partnership? And then Julien comes back. Do we chop and change again? So it's a slight concern for me, but I am looking forward to seeing Carter Vickers making his debut.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not really concerned about who the personnel are that are at the back. I just want it to be a settled back four and goalkeeper and for them to be doing the job. So, on a personal level, although I'm a big fan of Stephen Welsh, if Carter Vickers and Starfelt start to show that they are a good partnership, then I don't really mind, because at the end of the day, it's Celtic getting the results that I'm bothered about. So I'll be interested to see how things go with them today. Juranovic, I have no concerns about. Taylor, for me, is fine for games like this. I would like a stronger option at left back, especially in Europe, but he's absolutely fine domestically. Stephen Welsh is in a situation, unfortunately, where he's just going to have to, we were begging for the board and the club to strengthen at the back. They've now done that. So I suppose from his point of view, he's just got to make sure that he is, without doubt, the number one choice. And the only way you do that is showing it in training and showing it in games. He might very well get the chance in the next few games if things don't go well for Carter Vickers and Starfelt. So we just need to kind of wait and see. Only time will tell as far as that's concerned.
Well, we'll bring in as many comments as we possibly can. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I know that match day is going to be slightly different from last season, where Celtic fans were glued to the Path to Paradise. Non-season ticket holders were glued to any kind of stream they could get a hold of. And they were tuning in and out and coming into the Bulletin, which was great. This season's going to be different. Laura and I are not at the game today, unfortunately. And I hope to get to some games. I mean, the seat is going to have to get dusted off at some point, Laura, but we've not figured out how to get the pre- and post-match bulletins out and be at the game at the same time. But we will figure something out. Meanwhile, these bulletins will continue. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and if any other platforms are interested in streaming it, we'll get on them as well. It's one of these things as well. We've got Ange Postecoglou coming in, loads of Australian Celtic fans tuning into the show, Japanese-based fans, tuning into the show to hear about Kyogo. So welcome everybody, and welcome to all our regulars who are tuning into a Celtic State of Mind. Autumn Glow, you're welcome, Palace. He is talking, of course, about Odsonne Edouard, and he says, I almost forgot what a special player Eddie had been before Lenny came back. We will be talking about our striker who is starting today, so thanks for letting us know that Eddie scored a couple of goals against Spurs. Martin Bickett, can't wait to see the famous green and white of Glasgow. Bring it on. Yeah, I was getting photographs here from my brother and my nephew who are at the game, Laura. So, yeah, the seats are looking good. But as I say, a wee bit dusty this season so far. David Bradley, good performance, Celtic today. And Pope Lion, nice name. My man Eddie doing what we know he can do. That's saying, come on, the Celtic. Well, absolutely. We've got to move on. But I do keep one eye on former players. And it will be interesting to see how Edouard, Ayer and Christie do down south. Now, before we get into the midfield, Laura, we did do an emergency broadcast yesterday. Breaking news, Dominic Mackay stands down from his post as CEO at Celtic Park. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, Laura. There was kind of rumblings during the week that there might be an announcement coming up. Ridiculizer comes in. I doubt any of the players care which talking head corporate suit is fronting the board. I think this is an interesting point. I've spoken to a lot of people who were involved around about the time of the takeover and the old board and the new regime coming in, Laura. And I'm always interested because despite the fact that was a very difficult period for the club, it's one that always intrigues me. So we've spoken to people like Tom Grant, who was on the old board, but he was retained by Fergus. We've spoken to David Lowe. We've spoken to Jim Orr, who was part of Save Our Celts. We've spoken previously to Matt McGlone, Celts for Change, and various other people who are involved, and loads of commentators who were working in the media around about that time. Hugh McDonald particularly spoke about Fergus McCann. And I'm looking at that situation, and I've always asked any players who were around about Celtic at that time, how did this affect you as a player? You know, if there's backroom unrest, for example, how does it affect you as a player? So people like Tom Boyd and Mike Galloway and Peter Grant, I've spoken to these guys, and they've all kind of said that, yeah, you know it's there. It never ever got to the stage, Laura, that the pay check didn't arrive. There was never that issue. I know a lot of clubs have had that issue in the past. So they were able to go to their training, concentrate on their game, and they knew that this was going on in the background. But even on the boycotted games, you know, I've spoken to guys who were involved in those games, Laura, and they've said they are able to tune out and just concentrate on the game. They're aware that the size of the crowd isn't what they would be used to, I guess, when 12,000 people were in at the old Celtic Park. But they're able to tune in. So I think the Ridiculizer makes a good point there. If you've got a strong enough manager who can get the squad just to concentrate on their game, then everything that's happening in the background can be kind of tuned out. You know, you can actually tune out of that and focus on the game. Is that how you read this situation with, I call it unrest? I mean, it was a surprise announcement yesterday that, you know, a new CEO is already gone.
Well, I think it's the same as in any walk of life. You know, if you're still getting paid to do your job, ultimately you have to do your job. Yes, it might make it more difficult for you to do your job in certain circumstances, but I think the type of unrest that we're talking about here is the type of unrest that the only way in which it might affect the playing staff is if it affects the manager's ability to do his job and the manager's ability to coach to his full ability and bring players in as well. But for the players who are already in the club, you know, they're caring about the training, they're caring about the directions they've got, and they're caring about the opposition that they're playing on a Saturday or during the week. I think while they may be aware of the unrest, the same as the players were back in the 90s, they will undoubtedly not be thinking about that day to day or minute to minute, especially on match days. You know, they've got a job to do, they've got an opposition to concentrate on, and ultimately that's the job they're paid to do. If it's in a situation like in the 90s, there was a situation where players weren't paid, then you're talking about something different. But you know, if it's to do with you know, changes of position, changes of personnel in parts of the club they're not really involved with, then I don't see it has much of an impact. Even when there's massive changes amongst playing personnel and the people that they're going out on the field with, they're still expected to do their jobs, and rightly so. And I think that will be the case today. I think actually, hopefully, what will happen today is if we go out and have a good performance and a good result today, it won't allay the fans' fears completely about what's happening with the club, but it will help. Success and victories on the pitch always make things seem better than they might otherwise be. So ultimately, that's what we want from the players today, is to go out and play the way that we expect them to do every week, and it'll help end what has not been a very positive week on a slightly more positive note.
Last season, Laura, we had protests outside Celtic Park. There were banners unfurled in relation to the board not being fit for purpose. We've seen the banners, a nod back to the 90s, back the team, sack the board. If, the same thing happens in terms of the unrest among the support happens this season, whilst we're actually in the ground, Laura, it'll be a completely different scenario, won't it? Because it was almost as though last season it was quite easy for the board just to turn a blind eye to the fact that there was people talking about this on a constant basis online, setting up groups in order to try and take the club to task in terms of the share option and the refunds, etc., etc. And it felt as though, whilst you don't have a voice in the stadium, it was almost as if you were talking into an echo chamber, wasn't it? It's going to be different this season if the fans do revolt and do make their displeasure quite clear at Celtic Park.
Yeah, because I think there was a situation a few weeks ago where it was made quite clear that one of the sources at the club was saying something along the lines of, Celtic fans have plenty of channels through which to voice their discontent or whatever it is. So that phrase gave you the impression that they were quite happy last season to ignore what was going on and the discussions that were being had amongst the support, because specifically we weren't at the stadium to voice that concern. Neil Lennon, in my opinion, just to take an example, would not have lasted until February had it been weeks and weeks and weeks of fans in the ground making their voices heard and making their voices known. It would have been far too poisonous an atmosphere for it to continue. Certainly the lack of fans in the stadium helped to dilute the sense of outrage and the sense of disgust with the way the club was being running that was obviously felt amongst the support. That won't be diluted this season. That will be given in full force. And if people like Ian Bankier and Michael Nicholson and other board members are in that stadium today and things don't go the way that they're supposed to go, or if the fans choose to voice their discontent with what's happened this week, they will be in no doubt about how the fans feel. And part of me thinks, it's not a disaster quite yet. We don't know exactly the reasons why Dom left. We have our speculations. We don't know whether Michael Nicholson is going to be a decent enough acting replacement or what the plans are going forward. But what you can say for certainty is that the club and the way it's being run at the moment is being run in a way that you would hardly ever see at any other club, and certainly not any of the more successful clubs in world football. And that alone is enough to frustrate fans. And I can see there being a situation today where they will vent that frustration.
It's going to be interesting, Laura, as we go through the season. Even if Celtic are winning games and Ange Postecoglou's team is playing as well as we know they can play, it will be interesting to see how much of a focus will be on the board and how the club is being run. We will obviously cover all of that as the season goes on. Today we're up against Ross County. Now Jonathan comes in. Jonathan Brown, you're watching on YouTube. Big call to drop Welsh. I think it is a big call. A Yeti with his last chance saloon. So let's jump up front for a moment. We've not covered the midfield just yet, Laura, but let's have a wee chat about the decision to play a Yeti. It obviously comes down to the fact that at this moment in time, and when you look at the bench, and I'm aware that Jota and Abada can play through the middle, he is our only striker at this moment in time. Correct me if I'm wrong, because Giacomakis is clearly unfit at this moment, or not match fit. Otherwise, he'd be on the bench at least. So a Yeti starts. He is our only striker. And I tend to agree with Jonathan. I think between now and January, he is in last chance saloon territory, isn't he?
Yeah, Tony and I were of the opinion yesterday on the bulletin that Giakoumakis would come in primarily because we thought, it's been the international break. He's had a couple of weeks to bed into the team and whatever. He will make his start. Jim was of a different opinion and thought that because he hadn't played very much, I believe since last May, that he wouldn't be match fit. And then Ange confirmed that in his pre-match press conference. So that only left one option, and that was for Ajeti to come in. I think the thing with Ajeti is he's now got a situation where if rumours are to be believed, Kyogo's going to be out for at least the next month, so around about 7 matches or so. And Giakoumakis might not be up to match fitness for a few weeks yet. So this is going to be a clear run for Ajeti to make his name and to stamp his authority on that shirt. If he goes and scores a goal in every game in the next 5 games, or a couple of braces and a few assists and things like that, he's going to make it very hard to drop him. But if he has the lack of impact that he's had so far, then he's just going to be seen as what he currently is, which is a placeholder until somebody better comes back in. So he must be thinking to himself, this is my chance. This is my chance to cement my place in the team and give the manager a decision to make, because for a player in Ajeti's situation, that is as much as you can do. Kyogo undoubtedly will come back in as soon as he's fit and available, but Ajeti's real challenge here is against Giakoumakis and making sure he's in front of him for selection. And if he doesn't have an impact in these next few games before Giakoumakis is match fit, then he's really, as Jim said yesterday, probably got no future at Celtic, because he's had 4 or 5 chances now, and he really can't afford to be given very many more, I don't think.
No, I would agree with that. I think at the beginning of the season, there was a couple of players that Ange did very well to talk up. And the two I'm talking about is Barkas and Ajeti. I mean, obviously at that point, we didn't have Kyogo, we didn't have Joe Hart. I think bringing those two in shows you the difference in standard, Laura, as to what Barkas and Ajeti actually are. But Ajeti was given a few pre-season games. He was given the captain's armband. He scored the first goal, albeit in an uncompetitive game, under Ange Postecoglou. He looks lean, a lot fitter, and I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, he needs to make a big impression today, because when you imagine, somebody's telling us to stop talking about Eddie, but when you imagine who he's replacing a talismanic figure in Odsonne Edouard. Anybody who plays up front for Celtic this season, that's who they're replacing. And the quality, and I get your point, stop with the Eddie chat, absolutely. But it is relative to the fact that we're now really short up front, criminally so, where we've got one real out-and-out striker, and that is Albion Ajeti, who's fit for today's game. If he doesn't score and make a big, big impression, then you really are counting down the days till Giakoumakis comes back in, who can lead the line until Kyogo comes back in, and then you start feeling a wee bit better about the situation. But if that is indeed the situation, and Ajeti very quickly falls down to third in the pecking order, Laura, then whoever it is at the club who's dealing with transfers, and I think Michael Nicholson is that man, as far as I'm led to believe, you've got to get a deal for Ajeti to move on. You've got to get a deal for Barkas to move on. These are guys on decent wages who it's not worked out for. So yeah, last chance saloon, 100%. We're playing Ross County at Celtic Park. I remember the chance he had in that 2-0 game when they beat us, Laura, where he's hit the post, and a lot of footballers, and maybe it's just a natural reaction, they smile or they laugh. And I just remember looking back on that with absolute frustration, because you know that somewhere in there is a player who can actually contribute and score goals. And, you're going back to his Ball career. He's still young. This could be very much like the Timo Puku situation, where he's had a bad spell at Celtic, he goes away and he flourishes elsewhere. Or it could be that he comes in and he really staples his name to Ange Postecoglou's team list. Which do you think it's going to be, Laura? I'm going to ask you the big question.
Well, one thing I was going to say is, and this is with all due respect to Ross County, I think they're probably one of the poorer teams in the top flight. So if you can't do it against them, then he's very unlikely to do it against anybody. But I can't say that I've seen enough from him to suggest that today or the next run of matches is going to be any different. The only sense in which I can think it's going to be any different is he's surely not going to be short of chances when you've got Rogic, when you've got Abada, when you've got Jota and Turnbull and McGregor. He cannot complain about the quality supporting him. And so, if he can't put chances away in a team like that, then he's got no hope. But no, to answer the question, I'm going to nail my colours to the mast and say I think if he was going to take his chance, he would have taken it by now. I think it's only a matter of time before he's away.
We shall see. Now, let's have a look at some of that backup. We've got Abada down the right, Jota down the left, Rogic in the middle. I mean, we dedicated a podcast during the week to Jota, and I was told to stop being so positive about a player. Interesting reaction. Abada had his quietest game against Rangers, but as Jim pointed out, other than the opening stages of the Alkmaar game, he was quite quiet against them as well. So we're looking for a back to Abada-esque performance today. But again, going back to what Jim says, and I don't think he was being overcritical, he's looked his best at Celtic Park in the wide expanses. He has, and he has looked his best at home. So I'm looking for a performance out of Abada. Really looking forward to what Jota can do. Rogic's done a bit of travelling over the international break. Interesting to see him in there. I think the other option, I guess, Laura, would have been Turnbull as a number 10 and then bringing in either Soro or McCarthy for a start. So would you have gone for Rogic?
I mean, he's not likely to last 90 minutes, whether he's been on a flight from Australia or whether he's been staying down the road in Accounting. So either way, I'm not sure how much of a difference that makes. But, I think if we can get a good 50, 60 minutes out of him in the game, then that's going to be better than nothing. And I certainly think he's a more creative option and a more a bit able to have more of an impact on the game going forward than anybody on the bench. The only other option I would have suggested, and we were talking about it before we came on air, was perhaps to put Turnbull in the 10 position and maybe have Soro and McGregor in the middle. But again, there's plenty of reasons you maybe wouldn't want Soro there either, because as we all know, he likes a challenge or two, and maybe Ange has decided that he's had a bit of enough of that of planning for going down to 10 men. But to sum up, I think Rogic will give us a chance to create chances, especially for a Yeti when he needs that confidence boost. And if we can get 50 or 60 minutes out of him and tie the game up before then that'll be all the better for it.
McGregor and Turnbull, I think generally speaking, they've both had good starts to the season. Turnbull came in for some criticism early on, and again against Rangers. Is that undue? Do you think that's a wee bit OTT to level that kind of criticism? I know that you're a big fan of Turnbull, but it was one of these games where there was 2 or 3 players who didn't show up, and I didn't think Turnbull was great against Rangers, but I wasn't getting overly concerned because he's shown us what he can do, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, I pride myself on, yes, I'm a big fan of Turnbull and I'll sing his praises whenever they are due, but, I also feel like I'm honest enough to say there are games this season, particularly against Rangers and some of the other bigger games, where he hasn't shown up, didn't show up against Hearts in the first game either. So, it can run a bit hot and cold sometimes. He's either the linchpin of the team and scores a hat-trick against Jablonec, or the game can completely pass him by. He doesn't seem to be a kind of middle-of-the-road player as far as that's concerned. You would like him to have more of an impact in the games where he does do poorly. But I think on the whole, I think there was a bit of hyperbole attached to, I did see some people saying at various points that he should be sold and that kind of thing. I think he's far too good a quality player not to hold on to him for a little bit longer. And if he can have more of an impact on the team as the season goes on, then perhaps he's one for looking to sell on for a slightly inflated price in the future. But yeah, he has had poor performances. I would hold my hands up and say that, as big a fan as I am of him. But I still think his positives outweigh his negatives.
Now, one final point before we get to the action, Laura. I think looking at that bench, it really does highlight how threadbare our squad is at the moment. I mean, there's players on there, Urugiri, for example, who's never played a professional game of football for Celtic. Liam Shaw's the same. Montgomery has done very well, but he is obviously still a young, inexperienced player. And we do have some experience in Sorrel and McCarthy. So looking at that bench, I think that's a massive concern, and one that at this moment in time, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the weeks and months to come, I think Ange Postecoglou's in the best position he has been in to basically say to the board, you back me, because obviously the last thing they want is any unrest with a gaffer at this moment in time when we're already concerned about the goings on behind the scenes. We've got loads of predictions coming through. I'm going to bring one up because I think there is a good possibility that it will end up 4-0 Celtic. Joe Porter, what's your thoughts on a prediction, Laura?
Well, to talk about the bench briefly, the thing that concerns me is if the first 11 aren't scoring goals, I don't see where they're going to come from off the bench. So I hope that the goals come from the first 11, and I'm going to be positive and back it and say, I'm going to say 3-0, and I think Ayeti's going to get a goal as well. So I'll go with that.
Nice and positive. Enjoy the action, everybody. Thank you, and we'll see you at half-time on A Celtic State of Mind.